Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts about the 40K universe. I am your host Gershwan and you are watching One Mind Syndicate. Today we begin talking about first founding chapters. Now we've already done the Imperial Fists and Alpha Legion. What I need you guys to do is please comment down below and let me know what first founding chapter you guys would like us to create a video for next. That's going to be next week or possibly even in the next couple of days. So don't forget to comment down below with suggestion followed by the first founding chapter that you are most interested in listening to lore video on. So let's get into 40 facts about the Night Lords. The Night Lords were originally the 8th Legion of Space Marines, created during the first founding and became one of the 9 traitor legions of Chaos Space Marines that betrayed the Emperor of Mankind during the Horus Heresy. They do not worship any of the 4 Chaos Gods individually, but acknowledge them equal in the form of Chaos Undivided, as they ruthlessly spread terror and fear amongst the galaxy's inhabitants. The Night Lords are experts in the use of terror tactics to win battles and demoralize their foes before the main combat even begins. Since the dark days of the Horus Heresy, Imperial scholars have pondered how the truest loyalty of many of the Legiones Astartes could have turned to base treachery, purest devotion to hate, nobility to wickedness, but for the Night Lords, perhaps their heart always belonged to darkness. Created with a higher purpose, perhaps then their end could have been different, but their history is one of poisoned ideology and atrocity. Even when they were counted amongst the loyal Space Marine legions, their nature and actions were ever questioned. Some argue that they were simply a function of necessity. The monsters needed to drag a barbaric age into the light. Some say that they were a mistake, a misjudgment compounded by circumstances. A few wonder if they were damned from the moment they were born, that they were destined never to be part of the future they would help to create. All such speculation is ultimately pointless. No matter the cause, the Night Lords are the creatures of horror and always were. The 8th Legion was soaked in blood from birth. The Legion's first recruits came from the linked prison sinks of ancient Terra. In vast caverns, filled with half-crushed ruins of millennia past, there lived men and women who had transgressed against the laws of their masters, condemned never to see the light again or breathe fresh air. They lived out their lives in fear and blind darkness. There was no law in these lightless lands, and survival existed only by the blade's edge. Only the strongest and most ruthless survived in these subterranean warrens. And those who did grew in cruelty and cunning, fed by a constant influx from the hive city above. The prison sinks were an ever-hungering gate of madness and murder. But of the millions who lived and died in these sinks, not all had been punished by the world above. Amongst the bloodshed and fear, children were born, cradled in the dark and raised amongst death. Those who lived over a standard decade were pale, silent creatures who moved without sound. The Night's Children, the prisoners called them, and even the most savage killers would not seek them out by choice. It was from these pale children that the Emperor of Mankind would create the first warriors of the 8th Legion, dour with skin so pale it resembled ash or powdered bone. They were far from their brethren legionnaires in manner and appearance. The gene seed of the 8th Legion had been well paired with the human stocks of its first recruits, and if anything, it seemed as if one had been made with the other in mind. Besides accentuating their paleness of skin, the gene seed gave the sons of the underworld the ability to see through darkness to a degree that far exceeded that of the other Astartes of other legions. This gift was also a curse, forcing them to see the light of suns and stars through filters and flare buffers. Even though they now walked in the light of the world above, the warriors of the 8th Legion always walked in the night. The first use that the Emperor found of his 8th Legion was to bring to heel those who believed that the sins of the past could live on in the newborn Imperium of Man. Several of those who had bent their knees to the Emperor had done so because they believed that this was the only choice. Others, having seen the empire of the techno-barbarian warlords rise and fall, believed that they were simply part of a temporary arrangement. Crimes against the New Order took many faces, from the Sargorian enclaves, whose gene atrocities continued in secret, to the sigh breathings of the court of Antiochus and the march of the 10 million. All showed that even in the face of all the emperor's might, some would fall back into the ways of the old knight. When such crimes required no simple crushing, but retribution, the emperor deployed the 8th Legion. Some such actions seem well suited for the 8th Legion, whether as a consequence of their genetic inheritance or the combination of their origins and indoctrinations. The warriors of the 8th Legion seem to have tended towards moral absolution and a drive to enact retribution. There was no shades of gray in the 8th Legion's moral universe, no degree of guilt or innocence. Truth and falsehood was as day is to night. Indivisible and unqualified, the dark was the realm of guilt, lies, and monsters, and those who dwelt in the dark knew only the language of blood, the message of swift and merciless retribution for their actions. Justice brought the light to darkness, and justice was neither warm nor caring, but as indifferent and cold as the edge of a knife. The warriors of the 8th Legion were creatures made to live in the dark and to fight a war for a future of light. In their core, they were warriors for a future that would have no place for creatures of their kind. At least, that is what those who knew the 8th Legion now say. Perhaps memory was too kind. Perhaps many wished to believe that there was a nobility in such monsters, where in fact, there was only horror. Perhaps many wished there to be a purpose behind atrocity. Otherwise, how could such creatures be suffered to live? It would be easy to say that the coming of Conrad Kurz to the 8th Legion changed everything, that the fall of the Night Lords began at the moment the Emperor reunited his 8th son with the Legion created from his genome. But it would be truer to say that it was Nostromo that set both Kurz and the Night Lords on the path to treachery. Kurz was the gene sire of the 8th Legion, but he had two fathers, two hands that shaped his nature, and through him the fate of his legion. The Emperor who spun the substance of Kurz's life, and the planet Nostromo, which had raised and taught him. What the Emperor intended for his son can never be known, but the nature of Nostromo can be. Nostromo was a bleak, sunless hive world of suffering, pain, and corruption, at the heart of a string of planets which had kept the ability to cross the stars through the Age of Strife. It was a world of sprawling cities, of smoke industry, and of sweat of millions. Nostromo's wealth, for wealth there was, laid in the seams of adamantium ore beneath its surface. Worlds far from Nostromo fed on its output, and the mines had long wormed deep into its flesh. Nostromo was perpetually dark due to its population-clogged atmosphere, and the fact that it circled a slowly dying star, whose light was unable to penetrate its gaze to reach the surface. The world was barely better lit at noon than at midnight. A shroud of perpetual darkness produced by a massive amount of toxic smog kept the planet swathed in dull grays and deep blacks. Only the rich could afford the Nostromo idea of illumination, which was little more than a dim blue illumination strip that was placed in the ceilings of the ruling hierarchy's luxurious dwellings in the spires of the Dark World's hive cities. The world had 5 major cities that straddled the habitable hub of the planet, named in sequence from Nostromo Prime to Nostromo Quintus. Each hive city functioned as a self-contained industrial system. Due to the synchronicity in the orbit of Nostromo and Tembor, the moon interloped between Nostromo and its dying sun, these cities experienced the equivalent of a Terran night, even during the middle of the Nostromo summer. Its cities were warrens of stone and iron, kilometer-foot-tall stacks pointed up at the perpetual night. Bridges of black metal crisscrossed the narrow ravines of alleys and streets. Cathedrals and factories grew from the forest of slums, and roofs crawling with gargoyles. Smog lay over everything like a cloak drawn around a dying man, turning what little light shone from windows and lamps into sickly hollows. Dust, smoke, and the reek of chemicals filled the air, and worked into the flesh of every man, woman, and child, trimming away their years so that the best that life could offer was a slow decline in grinding servitude, never glimpsing the brightness of hope or the warmth of true happiness. The physiology and genomes of the people that lived in Nostromo hive cities remained mostly identical to that of the baseline human from the Segmentum Solar, with the exception that none of the planet's people possessed irises. The visible part of their eyes consisted entirely of their pupils. The people of Nostromo were pale, and most were thin and gaunt, given by the turns to distrust, dark humor, and callousness. This acute form of albinism, though a recessive mutation, had become common in Nostroman population. The vast majority of the planet's people lived in poverty, as foundry laborers, while the rich grew in affluence, trampling down or simply killing outright any who dared oppose the status quo. Depression was an inescapable way of life for most Nostromans, and overpopulation was prevented not by war, disease, or legislation, but by suicide rate. The Dark owned Nostromo. Body and soul, its existence was a horror to equal any Xenos enslavement or nightmare of the Dark Age of technology. If there ever had been true laws, they had vanished long ago, eaten by the greed of the few and the desperation of many. Murder was the currency of life, and strength came from violence. Every sin, great and small, had its home in Nostromo's endless night. It had been said by those remembrancers who recorded its history after its reclamation, that during this time, weeping and pleading were the sounds carried eternally in the wind. And every child grew to know that the only law was that of the knife, and that the only right belonged to the strong to do with as they will. Corrupt and murderous gangs, whether or not they were named as such, ruled every part of Nostromo, from the height of nobility to the lowliest alleys. Every inch of Nostromo was someone's domain, someone's territory, or hunting ground. In the slum habitation stacks, the gangs ruled by raw fear, killing and torturing as they pleased, fighting wars with the feral packs of outcasts who were closer to animals than men. It was said that many of these gangs ate the dead, treating their territories as a predator might a hunting ground. In the mines and factories which turned the planet's wheel of industry, the gangs went by names that echoed with a false authority. The Iron Overseers, the Hands of Corgado, the Sons of Toil. Slab-muscled and furnace-scared, they walked the streets, clanking with weaponry and reeking of murder, enforcing order that was little more than slavery. In the wealthier areas, the rake-heel sons and daughters of the corrupt nobility gathered in packs, clad in costumes like strutting peacocks, as quick to kill with blade or gun as they were to cast an insult. No matter what their station, almost all gangs owed fealty to one of the numberless barons, counts, or lords, who in turn served still more powerful men and women, many of whom stylized themselves with courtly titles that echoed of a long-forgotten nobility. Though wrapped in the trappings of birth, blood, and feudal right, there was no division between the rulers of Nostromo and its criminal overlords. They were one and the same, cruel monarchs of kingdoms built of sin. And those were 40 facts about the Night Lords. Now subscribe to the channel to get part 2 where we get into the good stuff of this 8th Legion or the Night Lords, because we haven't gotten to the good stuff. Right now you just found out that this Space Marine Legion puts all other Space Marine Legions to shame when it comes to hiring or recruiting psychopaths. Like, these guys are the worst of the worst that you can find. Like, these children probably killed their parents and smiled while doing it. That's who became the Night Lords. So again, subscribe to the channel to get part 2 so you can learn more about this sadistic chapter, and of course suggest down below what other first founding chapter you guys would like us to create a video for. Check out the channel. We have the Imperial Fists and the Alpha Legion so far, and then we have a bunch of other second founding chapters, and we have some a lot of Curse founding chapters. So subscribe to the channel, check out our playlists. We have a ton of great Space Marine videos, lore videos for you guys to check out. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. By you guys subscribing to the channel, liking, it really helps out. You guys all know that. I'll catch you guys tomorrow. This was Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate, signing out.